Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Medtech and Marketing, the Secrets to Unlocking Growth. We're pleased you could join us as we have an in-depth discussion on how a world-class marketing capability can help medtech companies increase their customer relevance, differentiate their offerings from the competition, and sustain long-term financial success. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. But before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right-hand corner of your presentation window. Should you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of this presentation. Following the presentation, you will also be able to access the on-demand recording of the webinar using the same link from today's live event. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. With us today are Matt Singer, Principal and Leader of ZS's Marketing Consulting Practice for the medical devices and diagnostics industry, and Sundeep Karnik, also a Principal in our Medical Products Practice and focuses on marketing and strategy. Matt and Sundeep, it is wonderful to have you both with us today. I'll pass it over to you both.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to our webinar on the opportunity for marketing in medtech. As we go through this, we always like to start with what's happening in the market and what are we hearing from customers. And what we see on the slide here is a recent survey that we did with hospital executives across the world. And what we found from this survey is a big disconnect between what customers are saying their needs are and what they're seeing from the industry in terms of how those needs are being addressed. What really stuck out to us is the stat in the upper left, where only 10% of these global hospital executives said that the technologies coming to market from medtech are aligned to their needs. So clearly an opportunity there. In addition, we've spoken with many leaders of medtech firms across the industry, and what we've heard is a consistent theme of frustration and concern with the current approach. We hear comments around, we're too focused on technical requirements and not commercial requirements. We need to move from launching anything to better launch it. In order to address these opportunities, we think there's a need to move beyond the traditional solutions that the industry has typically used. So, for example, rethinking the sales model. Do we need more sales representatives or different kinds of sales representatives? Do we need R&D to invent a new product? Do we need to go buy another company? Or if all else fails, cut costs? We think there's an untapped opportunity that the industry hasn't looked to enough, and that is a more empowered marketing capability. And we think companies that do this have an opportunity to outshine the competition. So what does this mean, a more empowered marketing capability? Well, we think that a more empowered marketing capability can drive value across the business continuum, from the portfolio strategy through new product development, product launches, and the ongoing portfolio management. We're going to talk about each one of these later on, but the common themes that you'll hear from us are the following. Number one, that more empowered marketing can make us much more customer and market driven. Number two, that the value proposition drives all the decisions that we make. And number three, that a more empowered marketing capability can prioritize focus on the best and most profitable growth opportunities in the pipeline and in the inline business. So now let's jump in, starting with a portfolio strategy. Here, more empowered marketing can help the industry evolve from what we call feature innovation to value innovation. So what do these terms mean? So feature innovation is where we're focused on the product and developing more features. It's typically very focused on the clinician or the end user, and then we figure out afterwards where the opportunity is. What value proposition is, or what value innovation is a relentless focus on the customer and solving the customer's problems. And thinking about the customer, including the clinician, but not only the clinician. The customer could be an administrator, it could be a patient, and really thinking about what problems and needs these different stakeholders have. This might lead us to invent different products, or not even invent products at all, which Sundeep will talk about later. So how do we start down the path of value innovation? Well, we believe that begins with a rigorous and impactful opportunity assessment. And we talk about being a relentless focus on the customer. Well, that means we need to go acquire voice of customer. And we believe this always starts with very robust primary market research and really going out to the marketplace, to the different stakeholders who influence the buying process, which could be clinicians, administrators, patients, nurses, and doing that beyond maybe the typical people that we talk to, key opinion leaders, our sales reps, friends and family, and really eliciting what those unmet needs are. Secondly, an impactful opportunity assessment is very data-driven. It starts with a very solid fact base around key assumptions that are important for the decisions that we need to make around the size of the market, the growth of the market, how it's segmented, what the future dynamics are, and that we avoid the blind spots that we have in our internal beliefs about what these facts are. And finally, an opportunity assessment reflects key global markets. We're not saying that you go out and do primary market research in 195 countries, but we need to do more than just the U.S. We need to avoid U.S.-centric thinking, so we're bringing innovation that is relevant to the different markets around the world. And we think we can do this by archetyping different countries, and you don't need to do 195 countries, maybe you need to do 5 to 10. By doing all this, value becomes the fabric of everything we do, from the portfolio, new product development, and lifecycle management, including product retirement, and the execution in the commercial regions. And now I'll turn it over to Sundeep.
So let's talk a little bit about where we need to transform new product development. If we look at the traditional focus of medtech companies, it has squarely been on product and feature development, and there are strong reasons for that. The medtech company has really been focused on the clinician user and how to help them use the technology solutions they are bringing to make their ability to perform the tasks much simpler or more effective. We think that this needs to change from a focus on the feature that enhances the clinician's ability to do a task to the delivery of a clinical or an economic outcome, which is where our customer needs have shifted. And the delivery of a clinical or economic outcome goes beyond the clinician's execution of that procedure task to a solution that looks more holistically at the customer needs. And here the definition of the customer expands beyond the clinician to include the patient themselves, as well as the institution within which that clinician operates, and perhaps even including the payer. In order to do this, what we need to understand is that you may no longer be focused on product development or feature enhancements, but developing a holistic solution that goes beyond the product. It may now include software, it may include websites and applications, it may include partnerships and ecosystems that collectively come together to deliver incremental clinical value or economic value for that particular use case. So if we had to give an example on this, if I were a diabetes medtech company, in the past, all I could do was to invent a better glucose strip or a better glucose meter. And I was making the measurement of blood glucose better with each incremental product that I brought to market. But in the future, it's not sufficient for me to have a great blood glucose meter. I need to help drive better blood glucose control for the patients, and somehow the sum total of the cost of my blood glucose meter and strips and everything else that the patient does, the doctor does, and the clinicians do, has to bring the cost of diabetes management into control. Therefore, now as a medtech company, it's not sufficient for me just to think about developing a new blood glucose strip, but I have to think about how else can I help the patient manage their day-to-day activities. Perhaps it is whether they go on a walk every day. Perhaps it is what they eat. Perhaps it is, decisions that they make along with their doctors during the course of the day and the course of that month to keep their blood glucose in control. And by the way, if our medtech companies do not think about their value-based or solution-based innovations that they bring to market, companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, and other digital and consumer-directed technology disruptors are going to come into those markets, serve our customers' needs, and take those patient pools and those opportunities away from us. So next we talk about how does this happen, and what processes do we use today to deliver these new innovations to the market, and what can we do to improve them? And as I think about the process that you see in front of you here today, right, which is the R&D stage gate process, I believe there are three things we need to think about changing or modifying. One is just the length of time that R&D product development takes, right? And this is a process that can go 3 years to up to 10 years, depending on the complexity of the product and the way it goes through the process. And if you recall, like a few minutes ago, we talked about solutions. And when you think about these solutions, there is a product part of the solution, but there are a lot of things that surround it that may be software, that may be a mobile app, that may be around connectivity, and they don't naturally fit into this process. They may have a very different timeline, and they may have very different gates and requirements. So we now have to accommodate those things into the process. The second thing is the metrics that you use to measure R&D productivity and success, and they're all about number of projects that come into the front end of the R&D pipeline and how many projects come out of the R&D pipeline. And the metric is, am I getting a good return on investment for my R&D? So the way this process gets used is to just make it a checkbox for those go, no-go decision stage gates, where you're trying to push as many projects from the front end of the funnel to the end so that you can have more and more projects or new products launched at the end of this so that you can show successful R&D. But that's really not the problem we're trying to solve. The problem we're trying to solve is R&D effective, and are we releasing new products to the market that the market values, that can sustain a higher price premium and deliver quality innovation to the market, and that price premium or that clinical differentiation is what that needs to deliver. What that essentially means is we need to use the stage gate process the way it was meant to be, and the business decisions around R&D need to be brought back into the process, which have gone by the wayside. So at each stage of the process, you need to ask critical business questions, which is, when I started down this R&D process, I had a certain impression of the market opportunity. How many patients are eligible for this? What does the competitive treatment look like? What might somebody use instead of this? How much might we get reimbursed for this? What regulations govern this therapy? And as you can imagine, if the R&D life cycle lasts for 5 years, all of these things change very dynamically over time. So unless we are consciously updating the business case and having a very, very clear discussion on, were the hypotheses, beliefs, and the analysis that I had 3 years ago, are they still valid today, or do I need to change something here? And is it still reasonable for me to bring this product to market 2 years down the road? Or have the conditions changed so much that now that product or that feature is not relevant anymore, we are going to have the wrong products, the wrong features, or the wrong solutions coming into the market, and then your product launches or the future product success is going to be very, very compromised. And as we talk about these different business questions that need to be answered effectively, the one central point we're trying to make is marketing is best positioned to answer these questions. If you give R&D the responsibility of pruning their own garden and killing their own projects, there is nothing in their incentives to compel them to do that in an objective way, and neither are they trained to do these analyses with the rigor and the integrity that they need to be done to inform a good decision process.
Thanks, Sundeep. Well, as we come out of the product development process, now we want to launch. Now we want to actually commercialize these these amazing new products that we've developed. And we see in the industry with many companies, many launches happening in parallel around the world. Sometimes dozens of launches, sometimes in the hundreds. I once heard a CEO say to investors, we're launching 600 products this year, as if this is a big badge of honor. We think it's important, though, that not all launches are created equal, so we shouldn't treat them all the same. And we think there's two fundamental questions that should be asked to help us decide how we should prioritize launches and delineate the launch strategy. Question number one is, how compelling is the value proposition from the customer's perspective? Not from our perspective, not how amazing our product features are, but how does the customer view the product? And with the customer being based on who is going to influence and make the decision about the adoption of the product. That could be the clinician, it could be an administrator, it could even be a patient. And what they think is what matters. It doesn't matter how differentiated we think our product is, that's great, but what matters is how compelling is the value proposition from the customer's eye. The second question is, how large is the realistic addressable market opportunity for the product? So if we're the fourth spine robot to market or the third TAVR, how should the market opportunity be characterized differently than when the first product came to market? Is part of the market locked up? Is it going to be very difficult to access certain segments of the market? And to be very realistic about what's left for us when we come to market. And we think these two questions need to be asked for each market that you're launching into, because the answer might be quite different. When you answer these questions, you can start to archetype your launches into different categories. So what we show on the slide here is the axes that we talked about on the previous page. So the x-axis is the value proposition, and the y-axis is the addressable market. So the products that end up in the upper right, these are the ones that have a very compelling value proposition from the perspective of the customer and a very large addressable market. These are the game changers. These are the products that we want to double down in, make sure we prioritize and are investing the most resources in, because these are the ones that have the best opportunity. As we work around the page and we go down to the lower right, so products that have that strong value proposition but a smaller addressable market, these are the ones we need to be very careful about. We need to think about, are there opportunities to redefine the market, to grow it? And if not, then we need to be very careful about the investments we make in these launches. When we go to the upper left, so these are the products that have the large addressable market, but a weak value proposition in the customer's eyes. Here, we need to see, is there an opportunity to strengthen the value proposition? Can we develop more evidence that supports what we want to be able to claim? Or are there certain niches of this large market that we can hone in on where our value proposition actually becomes stronger? Finally, in the lower left are the products with a small market opportunity and a weak value proposition. And these are the dangerous ones. These are the ones that we really need to challenge, whether there's a real good reason to launch these products. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there's a cost of goods sold opportunity that will help us from a financial perspective. And if not, we believe the industry should challenge itself around whether these products should be launched at all. What we show on this slide is a typical example that we see in the industry, where there are very, very few products, if any, in the upper right. And that same product might actually be in a different quadrant depending on what country you're talking about. So product A here is a prioritize invest for the UK, but for Germany, it's in the carefully invest segment. So that should lead to a very different strategy and a very different prioritization between those two markets. What we unfortunately see in most companies we work with is that most of the new products are in the lower left. But these products still get launched. And sometimes they still get launched with the same level of effort, resources, and budget as the products in the other quadrants. And this creates a very dangerous situation for the company, because the implications are, number one, you might suboptimize the products that have a better opportunity. Number two, you may distract your sales forces in the regions around the world by launching many, many, many small things at the same time. Now, that might not seem like a big deal to the individual product manager, but from the perspective of the commercial organization, launching 5 products in the fourth quarter when we're trying to make plans might be incredibly distracting and might have unintended negative consequences. So we believe the industry should ask itself, should I launch? And really challenge whether we should or not, and should we launch everywhere? And if we should, be more disciplined about when we launch. We don't necessarily have to launch immediately when the product is released from the stage gate process. Maybe we stage things out differently. Maybe we space products out to be more amenable to the opportunity that the new product presents itself. Sundeep, back to you.
So now we're going to switch to, we've launched all these products over a period of time, and what we've ended up with is a very bloated portfolio of products that we're going to market with. And as I start on this discussion, the one point I want to begin with is bloated product portfolios is by no means unique to the medtech industry. In fact, it is very, very pervasive all over, including my closet. So why do we have these bloated portfolios? And we talked about one driver of a bloated portfolio, which is an innovation or product development pipeline that is not very thoughtful about, should I be bringing this product to market in the first place just because it has a small innovation and a few doctors like it, to the sales folks who come back and say, I know of one institution or one implanting surgeon who really enjoys this particular feature, and we can certainly not kill this particular product because I know there is a market of one that will sustain it. And because there are such deep emotional anchors, right, because of product legacy and what it meant to one surgeon at one point in time, or because of emotional attachments to the people who are still at the company who brought that particular product to market, or certain products that are your favorites, we have product portfolio proliferation with emotion-driven decisions as opposed to real data that says, how does this product, relative to all the others that I have in my bag, add incremental clinical or economic value to my customer? And two, what does it take for me to sustain all of these products in my portfolio in terms of the end economic results and margin impact for me as a company? And as you see on the page, this involves getting really rigorous about data collection and analysis about complications at the customer level, at the sales level in supporting in the breadth of the portfolio, and all across the value chain from sustaining R&D to manufacturing to work-in-process inventory to inventory management, so on and so forth. And a bloated product portfolio, while it may look like it adds incremental dollars to the top line, it actually takes a lot away from the company's ability to be thoughtful in terms of driving economic profitability for the company, but also delivering a very clear and concise message to their customers on what that portfolio really stands for. So how do you get around this? We believe the way to get around this is to surface all of the facts of the impact of the breadth of your portfolio on the business efficiency and productivity. This data resides in various different parts of the company, not only along the different functions in the value chain, but spread out across your global footprint across the countries. In order to have this discussion effectively, somebody needs to collect all this data, analyze it rigorously, and then present it up to offer these trade-offs and decisions to senior leadership so that they can make the decisions. And we contend that marketing is best positioned to do the analyses because they are the most objective party who are able to do the analyses with the skill and the rigor that's required, but the objectivity that you simply cannot expect from either the R&D or the sales organization. Another thing we might suggest here is for the company to think about a stage gate-like process for portfolio management. So just as we have go-no-go decisions on managing a product pipeline, you may consider go-no-go decisions on the portfolio side, where you ask the question periodically, should I really have this product still in my bag, or are there reasons for me to kill it? That discipline and that way of working simply does not exist in companies. And portfolio decisions happen in an ad hoc way, which is really not conducive to really managing the portfolio accurately. So we would encourage companies to start thinking about, should we have an agenda item that says we're going to evaluate the portfolio during our quarterly business reviews or in our annual and strategic plans, where we are thinking actively about what are we going to take away instead of just focusing on more stuff that we're going to bring into the portfolio. So with that, I think I will turn it back over to Matt to talk about our concluding comments.
Thanks, Sundeep. So I think there's three main takeaways we'd love for everyone to walk away with. Number one is that customers want something different from the industry. We saw that at the top around customer feedback from hospital executives around the world that the industry isn't really meeting customers' needs. Number two is that a more empowered marketing capability can lead the organization to bring value to customers and to drive and ensure the right prioritization on the opportunities for impact on the bottom line. And number three, this can lead to huge impact, both on the top line and on the bottom line of the company. We recognize this isn't easy. This is a paradigm shift for how many companies have been operating in the past, but we think it's worth it. And with that concludes the prepared presentation, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Matt and Sundeep. That was a great discussion. We have a few minutes left and several questions from the audience. So this first one for you is, Matt, at my company, we do all the things you talk about, market research, segmentation, et cetera, yet we aren't seeing the results. What are we doing wrong?
Great question. I'm actually going to bring us back to one of the slides we showed earlier around opportunity assessment. And the question you're asking is something we commonly see with our clients, that there's few companies that don't think about doing this. They do market research, they size markets, they look around the world. But what we typically see when we peel back the onion a little bit more is that the questions are asked sometimes at the wrong time or not in a rigorous enough way. So what we mean by that is if you think back to our discussion around feature innovation versus value innovation, sometimes we're asking questions about customer needs, market opportunity after the product is already invented. So then it's more around how do we take something that was invented and figure out where to bring it. And it's kind of the classic square peg round hole situation where you might have a great invention but nobody wants it. Secondly, in terms of the level of rigor, we find that unfortunately the budgets that sit in global marketing or strategic marketing to do some of this work are incredibly insufficient. These budgets are traded off versus the operational part of the business and are often minimized because of that to make a P&L. And benchmarks we see of what's spent on marketing in the industry pales other industries. And so what that means is that the level of work that's done is insufficient. It's not done in enough countries. It's not done in both a qualitative and quantitative way. And in many companies, the approaches that we see used are the same approaches that were used 10, even 20 years ago. And we're not using more innovative approaches to elicit customer needs around the customer journey. We're not contemplating other stakeholders beyond the clinician. And we're not doing it in enough markets to make the right decisions. And, you know, the question we always ask our clients is, you spend 7 to 10% of your revenue on R&D. So in a $10 billion company, that's upwards of $2 billion. That's $2 billion to spend. Isn't it worth getting that right?
Perfect. Thank you. All right, next question, Matt, for you again. Once we've segmented our launches into the archetypes you've outlined, what are examples of different approaches we should use in each segment?
All right, so I'll bring us back on that question to this slide that we showed earlier on the different archetypes. So As you walk around this page, I can kind of highlight some of the key strategies that you should be thinking about. So if you're in the prioritize and invest segment, which is the one you want to hone in on and make sure you've put the right resources, there's two questions you should ask yourself. One is, are you developing a new market, or are you competing for share in an existing market? So if you're developing a new market, you need to think about strategies around building disease awareness, potentially seeking new reimbursement. Then if you're competing for share, then you have to think about how you're going to differentiate versus the alternative and really show this compelling value proposition you have. So this is all about having the right pricing, the right customer segmentation, advocacy, messaging, et cetera. If you're in the carefully invest quadrant in the lower right, here you have to ask, is there an opportunity to grow or redefine the market? Can I make this addressable market bigger than it currently is today? So perhaps I can drive referrals. Now, there's a lot of exciting new products out there in the cardiovascular space that are procedures done within the cath lab by interventional cardiologists, but that requires patients being referred to them by general cardiologists. So there's many companies out there that are thinking about, how do I drive more referrals? How do I grow this market for my amazing procedure that has a very compelling value proposition? If I don't have that opportunity to redefine the market, this is where we think you need to be very careful, because you can't launch everywhere. You need to figure out what are the right targets to go after and launch there, and really avoid the fallacy of if I launch it, everybody will come. If I'm in the upper left quadrant, the evaluate focus, here is around asking yourself the question is, can I strengthen my value proposition? It's a great market, but maybe my product isn't quite there yet, or maybe I don't have enough evidence. So what we see leading companies do here is the objective of the launch is to develop evidence to strengthen the value proposition. And thinking about that value proposition from the perspective of who's going to activate the opportunity. Is it the clinician? Do I need to show clinical evidence, or is it the payer, where I need to show evidence that's compelling to them to reimburse my product at the price I want to sell it at? If I can't strengthen my value proposition, then think about, are there opportunities to slice up this big market into individual niches where maybe my value proposition is strong within that particular niche? And then finally, in that lower left, like we talked about earlier, this is the one where we really want to challenge the industry to think about, should these products be launched? It does beg the question of, should the product be developed in the first place, but perhaps some of the strategies that Sundeep outlined may help with that over time. But with the stuff coming out of the pipeline now, which is the result of work from many, many years ago, we should really ask ourselves, should we launch? When should we launch? And when we do launch, how big of a deal should we make out of it? And the final thing I'll say on your question is, regardless of which quadrant you end up in, it's critical to identify the right metrics to evaluate the success of your launch. Because if your strategy is around developing evidence, if you're in that upper left quadrant, your metric probably shouldn't be sales. Unfortunately, we see too many companies defaulting to the traditional metrics around launches and setting themselves up for failure.
Great. Thank you, Matt, for those insights. Sundeep, our next question is for you. As a leader of a global business, we always struggle with prioritizing the here and now to make the quarter and the right investments to drive long-term growth. What advice do you have?
This always seems like a simple question, but I actually empathize with how challenging it can be in the moment. And, the way I've learned to think about this is to think about my performance in the present quarter to be about harvesting the products and the offerings that I have in my bag. Thinking about a few quarters out is more like thinking about sowing the seeds and planting so that I can harvest them in that quarter. And as a senior leader, I think you have to start asking yourself, can I succeed by being reactive in the moment, quarter to quarter, Or do I need to be proactive of what my subsequent quarters are likely going to look like if I have the exact same offerings in my bag 3 years from now? And some of the ways to do that is to instill some discipline in your analysis of the business and say, in my bag today, what % of my sales and profits come from products that were launched within the last 2 or 3 years? If you find that that proportion is diminishing, your alarm bell should start to ring saying, wait a second, I have an aging portfolio, the returns on these are dropping, right? I may be seeing some, sustained revenue growth, but there's pressure on the margins. If I don't plan to do something differently in the future, I'm going to have a problem. To support this, I think people need to dynamically and objectively assess the market for that product on an ongoing basis. Do not rely on the business case that you had when you launched the product into the market. Start to think about, does the opportunity size, the patient pools, the clinicians who are using them, the local market dynamics, do they look the same this year as they did last year? Are they going to look the same the next year? What about reimbursement? Do we think that there's going to be more reimbursement pressure next year than this year? What about the competitive environment? Have new products been launched since the last time I looked at it? What really is the runway for my basket that I have today? And therefore, can I afford to put all my eggs, quote unquote, into my current product basket? Or do I really need to be thinking proactively about the future and a different set of products and solutions? And therefore, how would I change my resource allocation? Whether it's my own time as a senior leader to do the analysis to say, is my portfolio adequate? How I assign my people to focus on future portfolio versus just driving the collateral, the tactics, the selling against the current portfolio, and then my dollars. Do I invest some of my dollars not just towards supporting and getting every last bit out of my current portfolio, but I'm taking some of those dollars to really build the business case, the value stories, and seed the market for the portfolio to come.
And just building off of Sundeep's points, what we see in many companies that are structured around global business units, with a matrix, with the region, with the commercial regions and some functions, is within the global business unit P&L, we see very often the U.S. commercial region, so the P&L of the sales of the sales in the U.S. and the effort to drive the sales, and upstream marketing sits in that same P&L, while the P&Ls for the other regions around the world sit within a separate regional P&L, and the functional P&Ls around R&D and supply chain are sometimes controlled solid line by the business unit, and sometimes are an allocation from the function. So the implication of that is that upstream marketing dollars are traded off against U.S. sales dollars. So if I'm in the quarter and I have soft sales and I want to make my operating income number, I look at all the levers I can in that P&L, and unfortunately upstream marketing is part of that trade-off. And we believe that's what the fallacy is. We believe that upstream marketing dollars should be traded off against other headquarters spend and have the same discipline that's put into what's done in manufacturing and quality and R&D, and not traded off against the commercial spend, because very rarely are those other functional dollars being traded off against U.S. sales.
Great, thank you both. Sundeep, our next question is for you as well. At my company, our biggest issue is budgets and resourcing. How do we get more resources prioritized against upstream marketing activities?
The first step is in making sure that you have a clear understanding of the budgets and the resources that are spent on marketing today. And in our experience, there is a lot of mislabeling of activities. So a lot of things that are considered marketing in some cases are actually sales support activities or other. in these companies, there is an overestimation of how much money they think they spend on marketing and therefore what returns they get from it. In other situations, many critical marketing questions are actually answered by people who do not sit or wear marketing hats. They sit in very different organizations, and therefore these companies tend to think that they have very lean and ineffective marketing organizations when actually the questions are being answered in the wrong place with the people with the wrong training. Once you can get a very accurate baseline on which marketing questions are important, how are they being answered, who's answering them, and with what budgets and what timelines and activities, can you start to say, does that look right? Or should I be reorganizing my budgets and my resourcing and how I organize these teams so that what I have the marketing organization I thought I had? And then to say, is what I thought I had really the marketing organization I would like to have, and then realign all those things in the future.
Great, thank you both. Our next question is for Sundeep. As a marketer, I look around and see that all the executives in the industry come from other functions like sales, R&D, or supply chain. Do I have to go through those typical paths, or do you have any advice for how I can get to the top via a marketing career path?
You know, this question goes back really to the values, the mission, and the way the company operates. And this is a fundamentally transformative change. And what that means is at the C-suite, there has to be a clear recognition of the importance of marketing for the future of the company, and then creating the opportunities and the path for folks that come with a strong marketing background to succeed, not only in the marketing track itself, but then into bigger, stronger leadership roles within the companies. And in this area, frankly, most medtech companies lag other sectors that have typically really valued what marketing brings to them. And, you know, the things that come to mind are consumer packaged good companies or media companies that are so much closer to the consumer, where understanding and responding to needs and innovating around what the customer wants has been paramount to a company's success, as opposed to the ability to sell or the ability to invent. So typically in many medtech companies, what we see happen is marketing is a place where people with the interest and curiosity come in for a rotation. So you have engineers who have, in the course of their work, done some, customer research and talked to clinicians, come and do a rotation in the marketing function. Or folks who have done sales who are considered high potential come and do a rotation in the marketing function. And this is looked at as a badge of honor and, a box that gets checked for them to be well-rounded executives so that they can go on and ascend within the company. And we feel like if all of the things that we have said through the course of the presentation, which is elevate the role of marketing and understand that marketing can add so much value to the future success of the company. When senior executives and companies start to embrace that, we feel like the tide will turn, where you now make a conscious effort as a company to create attractive opportunities for people to succeed within the marketing organization to ascend to the level of a chief marketing officer. And there are several medtech companies that have introduced the role of a chief marketing officer or chief digital officer in the last 5 or 10 years than ever existed before. So there is this tide that's turning towards marketing. But then we also feel like at the same time the CEOs and the boards need to think carefully and start to include these talented marketing folk for general management roles and roles in very senior leadership, because they recognize the value that they bring to the company.
And just kind of thinking about the person likely asking that question, who's probably sitting in a company who isn't there yet, what do you do? And I think the advice that we can give based on the people that we've seen who have successfully ascended from marketing to senior executive roles, what they've done is shown true business impact versus just marketing impact. So they've been very calculated around the priorities that they've focused on and been able to show, because of this amazing marketing that I did, this customer insight, this marketing initiative, here was the financial impact on the bottom line of what I did. And that's why this is important. Because if you think about the heritage in the industry with most executives coming from sales, it's been this belief that, okay, you need to be a salesperson to show, and then a sales manager to be able to show that, hey, I can drive impact on the bottom line. So as a marketer, do the same thing, and then you'll be noticed.
Great, thank you both. It looks like we have time for one more question. So Matt, this last question is for you. Can you give any examples of actually how to get started? This all seems so hard.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we agree. Unfortunately, many companies that we've talked to start and then give up because it's too hard, because they're missing the quarter or leadership changes. So we have a very pragmatic point of view about this. We think it's better to start with a priority or two versus trying to transform the whole company from the beginning. So pick an upcoming important launch or series of launches and really go deep in those areas using some of the approaches that we talked about here, and really show the impact rather than talk about the impact, to the point we made earlier around how you can ascend in the career path, and make sure that's tied to an important outcome that the organization cares about. And just being able to show an amazing marketing plan or an amazing strategy isn't enough. Pull it through to something that is very visible and tangible. And use that as a means to build momentum, to get people excited, so everyone can see what's in it for me. You know, what we've seen in past lives working within companies, where both Sundeep and I have come from, what's worked well is, initially, some of the stuff that we've talked about could be perceived as a change in the power structure from, say, an R&D organization. But when you get into it a little bit, R&D can actually get very excited, because now they're inventing stuff that people actually want to buy, and who doesn't want that, right? They're able to spend more time on innovation versus on sustaining the existing portfolio. So some of the prioritization we talked about related to the portfolio management, like Sundeep talked about, having a stage gate process around lifecycle management, not just the pipeline, actually makes R&D excited. From a sales perspective, bringing products and evidence and impactful messages makes them more successful, helps them make their incentive comp plan. And what sales rep isn't going to be excited about that? What country manager isn't going to be excited about that? So we think there's lots of opportunities to make impact on different functions in the company, where it actually isn't a removal of power, it's actually an enabling of much more success.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all the time that we have today. A big thanks to today's speakers, Matt Singer and Sundeep Karnik, and of course, our audience for joining us. As a reminder, today's webinar will be available on demand, and a link will be sent to you after the webinar. Also, audience questions that were not answered during the Q&A will be answered via email. Have a great day, everyone.